So here we're delving into the EWG information about pollutants in US tap water, and I'll just give you the highlights of this. They have detected that there's over 300 pollutants in US tap water, and actually many of those pollutants are not regulated, which means the EPA is responsible for regulating how much pollutants we can be exposed to safely. And if you've been following this and any other pollution issues, sometimes what we see, unfortunately, is that as the levels are going up of pollutants in our air, our water, our food, the EPA, it's a regulatory agency, and if they set standards that are too low and industry doesn't feel like they can comply with it, that's a problem. So they get a lot of pressure in the government to change the standards. And that's really unfortunate. The EPA has done that with lead over the years, for example. They've just been inching up the acceptable levels of lead in humans, not because we found out over time, gosh, we were wrong, it's totally safe to have more lead, but because the pressure from industry, they're finding, gosh, everybody has these levels, we're not regulating them, we can't eliminate more of it, so they've just increased the acceptable levels. That's also true of water. I don't mean to completely, bash the EPA. They have an unbelievably difficult job. But this is a really good example of why you can't just, when people say, well, if this was so bad, then the government wouldn't let us be exposed to it, drink it,
Ha
eat
ha
it,
ha.
breathe it.
You're right.
And, right, and that's the issue. That's not true. You cannot blindly assume that because the government allows us to be exposed to these things, that they are safe. That is just not true. You're relying on one tiny little, either the FDA or the EPA or a combination of agencies that are susceptible to outside pressures to tell you what's safe. And as you can see from this slide, at least 200 of those contaminants of the 300 aren't even being regulated. So when you're looking at water reports and saying, oh gosh, my water report here for my house or for my town is actually pretty good, that's only showing you a small percentage of the pollutants they are testing for. They're not testing for many of those contaminants. And we just found that out in West Virginia, those poor people having all of these issues with their drinking water from fracking and refineries, that they went back to those people after the spill and said, go ahead, you can drink, the water's fine. They never thought to test for a broader pool of contaminants. Those people went back and drank it and became very, very ill, and people were dying. And they went back and thought, gosh, what did we miss? That's a real head scratcher. And people went in and did private testing and realized that the water was completely toxic. They just didn't think to test for it. So, we have a paradigm in the US where we're constantly becoming more myopic. We're looking for less things and convincing ourselves that everything is fine and safe. And I don't think we can afford to do that, especially not when it comes to our kids. So this is just a handy chart just to show you that this is tap water. And I wish I could tell you that well water was a better alternative, but it's not, because of course you're getting all the runoff and everything that's in our aquifers, and that's not being filtered before it gets to you. So in some instances, people have wonderful well water, and I go to visit them frequently and drink it all the time. But that's often not the case. And if you have well water, you absolutely must test your well water. But here, just for tap water, I mean, this is a staggering amount of chemicals. And look at the chemicals that have been found above the health guidelines. Those are chemicals that are being tested for, that the EPA has set standards for, and they are still well above the current guidelines for health. That's what's coming out of your tap. This is another point, just saying that there are unregulated contaminants being detected, but they're not being disclosed. You're actually supposed to be getting a water quality report. I know I do. Aquarian sends mine out fairly regularly, and you can request it. It's a lot like, reading the Czechoslovakian dictionary. It's not all that helpful. But many of these water suppliers aren't even sending out their reports, and they're required to. And when they do, they're not disclosing the other contaminants that they found because they're not required to. That's a problem. So we keep looking at these reports thinking, oh, this is pretty good. I don't have to worry. I don't need to filter my water. And in fact, we are dead wrong.
Oh,
This
geez.
is just an example of some of the chemicals that you can find in your water. It's such an enormous list. It's alphabetically listed. If you look at this list, this is just the numerical um, contaminants found before you get into the alphabet. I mean, this is ridiculous. That's absolutely terrifying. All these chemicals are finding their way into our water. And you can find this on EWG. Obviously, it goes then from here all the way A through Z, and it's remarkable.
Those are mostly
I think a lot
carcinogens.
of people. Sorry, Maria?
I was saying those are mostly carcinogens that were listed.
Yes, and carcinogens, that's a great point. They're carcinogens, they're neurotoxins, they're all the chemicals that we are trying to avoid with our children because they are our canaries, right? They're most susceptible. They have the highest percent of water in their bodies, so their exposure is much greater than ours, and it's much more critical to them because they're in the developmental stages, right? Their little neurons are still making their connections, and this is giving their body information, right? Water is an information carrier, and this is giving their body information about how to proceed, and it's not the message we want them to be getting. So it's really important to look at your water source. Often people will say, yeah, but where is this contamination coming from? I don't understand. This stuff is regulated by the government, and everyone's doing their part. This is a nice slide that tells you this is mostly where these chemicals come from. I mean, I think this is incredible that EWG has put this all together, that you can just with one click come up with this. Most of it is industrial pollutants, unfortunately. That's really hard for us as individuals to control, but to empower you, you absolutely can be controlling it. First of all, there's, go ahead and advocate, talk to these companies and tell them. But more importantly, advocate with your dollars. Don't go buying these chemicals that these companies make. Most of them are not safe in your home anyway. I know this is a separate topic, but you really don't want to be spraying most of these chemicals in your kitchen, your cleaning products, um, rug cleaners, the dry cleaning chemicals. All of these things bioaccumulate in your home anyway, so it's a good opportunity for you to solve two problems at once: remove them from your home and decrease the chemical load and the toxin exposure for your children. And two, you're voting with your dollars because you're going to buy substitute products that are more natural, and you're voting for those companies and telling them this is important, and allowing them to have enough capital to increase their production and their marketing and get the word out. Sorry, I get really excited about these things.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see. Also, here's other things you can do. Agricultural pollutants, that shows up pretty high on the list as well. These are other ways for you to get involved in this. I can't tell you how often I'll be at Home Depot and I see people still picking up Roundup
Mm-hmm.
for their driveways, and they have a cart with two or three kids in it, and they're picking up the gallon-sized bucket of Roundup. If you don't yet know, it's our responsibility to tell you that, and your responsibility to become informed yourself about how incredibly dangerous those chemicals are for your children to be exposed to. And then I encourage you to get out and share that with everybody else. So there's a lot of ways for you to intervene just with this slide about, gosh, what could I be doing to avoid some of these chemicals? These are the chemicals that were exceeding the health-based limits. So these are ones that are tested for, but were way above the limits. Lead is a serious concern. I think it's interesting. That's one of the few contaminants that Western medicine really recognizes in the pediatric population and tests for regularly, except for, as I said before, they just keep increasing the tolerable load of it for kids, which is such a shame. Um, Here's the water utilities, because the common questions I get when I show this is everyone starts thinking, gulp, oh my gosh, this is terrible. What about my water? This is a report of the water facility treatment plants in Connecticut that were exceeding the health guidelines. So you can come back to this and see if you were on this list. And here's the violation summary for Connecticut. This, I think, is really interesting. And I love EWG that they put this together for us, because it shows you not only were there violations, but by type. What's the most common violation? Look at that number at the top, 5,000 violations because they weren't monitoring the water. What? I mean, what else are they supposed to be doing at these water treatment facilities? That is their very job, is they're supposed to be monitoring the water and fixing it. If
And
what exactly are they doing over there if they're not monitoring it regularly? It's
those are
just,
the
that's shocking to
only the
me. Yeah.
ones that have been caught, right?
Right. Excellent. Good point.
Yeah.
These are the reported ones. Also they publish what's the top rated water utilities and what's the lowest rated. And unfortunately, we're not on the top rated, but also we're not on the lowest. So you got something going for us there. I think it's interesting that Texas is all over the top water utilities. I can't imagine why, especially because they have so much agriculture and um, coal and gas. It's absolutely fascinating to me, but yet there it is.